And thank you so much for being with us. As you know, today we're going to do a 30-minute walkthrough in the galleries, and then we're just going to reconvene again at 6:30 at the space downstairs. In between those times, you will have the chance to kind of go use our cafe and get some refreshments. But I'm Can Batur, I'm the curator of live programs. Thank you so much for being with us today. And without giving a bigger introduction, which I will do at the space, I'll just give the floor to Jane and Lisa so that they can take it away.
I'm Jane, I'm from Assemble. We were some of the artists involved in this kind of group work. So yeah, it's nice to come back and see the space after it's been in use for the last 2 months or so.
Destroyed.
Yes, things are still vertical, which is, our structural engineers are going to be very happy about this.
Yeah, and I'm Lisa, I'm Learning Programme Manager here, and I'm also manage the Schools of Tomorrow programme, which you can see their work featured around the exhibition, and we'll go into a little bit more detail about that later on. So, yeah. But if you wanted to start, Jane.
Yeah, have to wait for it to come round. Well, so the exhibition is called The Place We Imagine, and that name really kind of grew out of process of lots of people kind of working together, working with local schools, but the idea really began with a drawing by an architect called Bo Bardi, who was Italian. She moved to Brazil just after the war in 1947, and her works in Brazil have really become known for centering people. She created a lot of social spaces, but within museums, within galleries, within leisure centres. And there's a drawing, which will eventually come round on this screen, and you might recognise some of the elements in it. So this structure we called the Big Red, and this one the Animal Roundabout or Menagerie. And so we've kind of used Lina's drawing of the Museum of Art of Sao Paulo as a starting point to rethink public space or publicness of galleries. And for us, this drawing is particularly interesting because it was done at the time at the height of a military dictatorship. So she's actually imagining something which was at that time impossible. Public space was also something that she was really kind of inventing in South America. It wasn't this kind of thing that we all sort of take for granted today. And so working with Nottingham Contemporary, we've sort of tried to rethink how we might invite different types of behaviours, different types of possibilities in these gallery spaces.
So, and then Schools of Tomorrow programme is an action-led inquiry research programme. We've partnered with 8 schools. 7 of those are primary schools and 1 of them is a nursery school. And we have placed 5 artists within those schools for the past 4 years. I'm nodding to Amanda. Amanda is our head of learning. She will fill me in if I forget anything. And the idea is for them to develop an action-led research inquiry question bespoke to each school, and that is derived from their school improvement plan. And one of the elements of Schools of Tomorrow was about creating a creative hub within the school setting. And that was an area that could be a workshop, it could be an exhibition space, it could be a space for discussion, it could be a reading space. So it was this space that actually changed to allow for those discussions with the children and for them to share their ideas. And I think that was one of the points that was your initial sort of interest within the programme as well, about how the environments change behaviours. And how behaviours change environments, vice versa, with the connection with Schools of Tomorrow.
Yeah, so it's really kind of actually centering the work that these amazing artists are doing in schools, kind of sort of in private within the school day, and seeing how that could be expressed in a space like this, but also evolve. And I think we'll probably talk more, and you'll see later how some of those artists have actually appropriated this space as well, in addition to what they've been doing in the schools.
Yeah, and it was very much about the children taking ownership of of that space within the school, and also very much child-led sort of learning as well throughout. So, and that has similarities to what Lina wants and what you were trying to achieve as well within a space.
Yeah, I mean, the ambition and why we ended up describing it as a group show, and something I hope when you kind of walk around the galleries you'll start to see fragments of things from each of the schools and each of the artists, but that there's a kind of shared language or cohesiveness that has come from 3 years, maybe more.
Yeah. We were through COVID, we were in COVID.
Conversations and workshops, and really it all makes sense now it's in the gallery, but actually it's been this process of actually kind of like working out what we're doing, why we're doing it, and thinking of the artists both as artists but essentially play workers. Several of them are trained play workers, and that fine balance between sort of the playground and the artwork, and in a way just sort of destroying both those terms to create something a little bit different here, and then have the children who we worked with through this time actually come to Nottingham Contemporary. A lot of them were familiar with it but hadn't necessarily visited themselves. We did some workshops downstairs in the space we're going to be in later, and so it's also about them being able to feel like they can claim this space as part of their city.
And we'll be talking a little bit in the talk later about the collaboration and the impact and learning, and what actually collaboration within this project means within Assemble as a collective, within our partner schools, collaborating with Nottingham Contemporary, as well as an internal process of us collaborating across teams as well. So that's really what we're going to talk.
We're still standing.
I know, that's what we're going to be talking about later down in the space. But I think whilst we're up here, we'll talk about the exhibits because we'll be probably referencing them. So you've mentioned Big Red.
So actually this structure we built last summer in Toronto for an organisation called the Bent Way, who have an amazing outdoor space under a flyover, and they had a whole programme about play, and as an institution we're kind of thinking like Nottingham about their role in Toronto as a place for kind of children and families. So we'd road tested this one luckily last year in an outdoor space, but it was amazing because in Toronto it's under a flyover. So it's like a 30-metre high outdoor space, and it just looked tiny in that setting. And then we put it in here.
But you've downsized it for here,
No, we didn't. It's the same size.
Oh, it's the same
it is
size.
the same size. We thought we might have to downsize it, but we didn't. So we'll downsize the verticality actually.
Right, okay.
Yeah, because of the ceiling height. But it just takes on a whole new spatial dimension, I think, in this space. Please climb onto it and participate in this artwork. But I think a lot of the ideas about thinking about these play pieces as sculptures is sort of challenging a bit how we think about the contemporary playground as well. Everything's brightly coloured, everything looks familiar, everything's used in the same way, everything's static. So using Lena's drawing as a starting point, we tried to play around with different ways you might think about a slide. So there's the kind of going up, going down, there's the stepping, there's the sort of slow slide around the back, there's this bit in the middle which doesn't seem to have a purpose, and then these sort of giant steps. So it has that kind of uncanniness to it, that sense of familiarity, but something a little bit different. And you'll notice also on the ceiling and elsewhere around the gallery, there are some fragments of Peter Romney, is that his name? Yeah, one of the artists who does a lot of work with narrative and storytelling. There's one on the wall just there by you, yeah. So these are all bits taken from things that the children he works with have sort of said, and they kind of disappear and come back into focus. And then we start to create sort of nice relationships between the two where things started to kind of intersect. Bigger bits up there. But when we began working on the sculptures for Nottingham, this piece felt like it had a home in a very obvious way. I don't know how many people have visited regularly, but every time I've been in the space, there's been a big wall up. Often the natural day lighting is closed off. So we really also wanted to create works that would really use this space and make the most of it. By putting something really big in.
So the narrative quotes that you referred to are by Melbury Primary School and their associate artist, as you mentioned, Peter. And they actually developed a script and made a film, which you can see on one of the monitors around the corner. And what we've done for the exhibition is take the audio off the film and worked with the children for them to extract the quotes from the narrative that they wanted. So there's actually 14, they're quite hard to find. Some of them look like little smudges on the walls. There's 14 quotes that actually tell the story as you go round the room. There's some on the windows, on the floor, on the walls. Yeah, in the ceiling. And I don't think anyone's found all 14 yet. So that's the script that the children have written, and that was to provide a different type of play. That was to provide more of a creative thinking type of play, and to promote role play, which then possibly would encourage physical play. Yeah. So the content that you can see around the perimeters is the children's work and the school's content. What we wanted to do is make sure that what Jane and Holly were looking at aligned with the schools. We didn't want to force an element onto the school that they were not interested in, or they were not developing, a strand they were not developing. So we've got about 6 out of the 8 schools, and then we've found other ways for the other schools to participate in that actually is genuine to what they're looking at. So these behind me are play prompts, and they've been done by Robin Hood Primary and their artist Laura Eldred. And what they did is as part of their inquiry question, they wanted to find out how teachers teach. So they brought the teachers in and said, how do you teach? What is the skill that we need? And then they decided, actually, we need to teach you how to play because you're an adult and you don't know how to play. So this is a call out from the children of prompts to adults to come and play with them. They're on sale in the shop as well. Just thought I'd mention that. We've also got other elements around the room that you can see. So the large typographical quotes that you can see are taken from the prompts, and they've been produced in an alphabet which you can download called Us, which was designed by Milford Academy. And you can see the alphabet, I think most of you were standing in front of it, is on show there. And you can download that. And again, that was with their artist, Laura Eldred. So she's crossed over the 2 schools. We've got work by Jubilee, Lead Academy. We've got a couple of pieces actually in the show. One of the annotated drawings of them actually working with their artist, Gillian Brent, to actually create sculptures, but they actually turned into play pieces. And you can see that on a film around the corner as well. So their learning was about learning by doing and making, and it was more about the materiality. But as a side element, they turned into these play elements, which was really lovely. And Jill is looking at outdoor learning with that school. And then you can see the little projection up high. That's by Nottingham Nursery and their associate artist, Sian Watson-Taylor. And the children wore GoPros, so we got an idea of actually what they do when they're not supervised in a sense of one-to-one, when they're left to roam around the nursery and play with the materials that have been provided or that they find. And so we get an idea of, there's a lot of noses and floors and blurs and things like that. The adults had them on as well, I think you forgot.
I think it was just me. I got given a GoPro, but it didn't work.
Yeah, I think you forgot to turn yours on where the children actually managed it. Yeah. So, and that's projected at height in order that when you're actually on the structures, you actually can see it directly on. But also, we also realised that it provides the view of a child looking up to an adult as well. So we get their sort of perspective thrown back at us, which I think is quite a nice take there. So yeah, I think that's covered most elements in here.
Yeah,
we've got reach as well.
Yeah, the gold leaf, that's Laura Eldred's. Which school was that?
So that was Robin Hood again.
Right.
And that was about, within their school, about them taking ownership over a space. And the idea of leaving something that's very precious, like gold leaf, like all the kids are like, wow. And we activate that every Saturday, 12 till 1, so you're more than welcome to join us and leave your own fingerprint. And that was about leaving traces, so that they, when they come back into that familiar space that's in the school, they know exactly which mark is theirs. Yeah. And it was also about hierarchy as well, with the material that's been used. But yeah, that's my selling point when we do it with the families. Do you want some real gold? The kids love it. It's like treasure. And then the highest one, I will let you know, that was an adult that ran and jumped at it. Yeah, so a bit of cheating there.
And so
Do take a seat.
Yeah, I mean, they're very comfortable, more stable, some more stable than others. But the animals were inspired by Lena's drawing. It's a bit hazy, but if you zoom in closely, you can kind of get a sense of these different sort of personalities. And our interpretation with this one was really based on something that's a little bit more accessible. So it's just a kind of vinyl application to the floor for the kind of rainbow roundabout. And that the animals would sit somewhere between a kind of oversized soft play, which a lot of people will be very familiar with, but of a scale that means, you know, they're quite hefty. They require a few people, more if you're smaller, to move them around. So there's aspects of necessitating a kind of collaboration, but also that they're not fixed elements. So they have a home in the gallery, but you'll see them kind of roam around and interfere and start to intersect.
We've just dragged them out of the funhouse, actually.
Yeah, we just
they were
carried them out of the
stacked.
funhouse.
Yeah.
And this one ended up being a lot more geared towards the kind of younger age groups, particularly in conversation with Sian, who works at Nottingham Nursery, who talked a lot to us about the idea of schema in play, that even at a very young age, people have different ideas about, or personalities in play. So some people are builders, some people are destroyers, some people are movers, and this kind of like fixation on different types of movement, of engagement, and how a piece like this could sort of maybe facilitate that. So often you see towers of animals, they often get knocked over, right? And people jump across them,
Yeah.
but also, and I think Lisa will be able to speak more to this a bit later, but the different ways in which people have just kind of interpreted the pieces for themselves, and there's really that invitation to not kick them about, but, you know, gently.
I think they do.
They do, but they're pretty robust. So this is, I suppose, is interesting because it's in a way a more literal interpretation from Lena's drawing, but actually materially is a little bit more kind of interesting, and as a device sort of does something more, I think, spatially than the big red, which is a kind of big.
And it's got movable
thing.
Elements, and you
Yeah.
have to collaborate to move them, because they're really, even as earlier, they're really heavy. So there's a lot of different elements of play that are drawn from this piece, as opposed to Big Red.
That big fixed one.
You know, they do travel quite a bit.
Yeah.
And they can also got that sort of familiarity of soft play that allows our audiences possibly to engage with them in a more
There's that, like, they know what they're supposed
accessible
to do kind
way.
of thing.
Yeah, and also they've got character as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, we find the kids feeding them or naming them and
really?
things like that. So yeah, so really warm.
And maybe we'll speak more about it later as well, but I mean, Assemble have a lot of play projects, and there's a kind of little bit of a tension between sort of fixed play objects, which are seen as maybe kind of too prescribed or prohibitive, to free imaginative play, and then loose parts play, which is almost at the kind of opposite end of the spectrum. So this sort of exhibition is trying to kind of integrate and speak to different forms of play that are sort of hotly contested in the play world. But Amanda and Lisa, you can go in depth into that later on, maybe.
Okay, well, should we briefly talk about the funhouse, because we might reference this quite a bit downstairs.
Yeah, so the
model.
funhouse is named by the kids at Robin Hood, and we worked a lot with Laura Elgett, the artist there, observing the kind of workshops that she did, and then did one that was a little bit more kind of didactic, in that we did a ceramics kind of freeform making ceramics workshop with them, where they sort of designed the funhouse for us, which is what's in the vitrine over there. And the funhouse was really born out of conversations with them about play and representing this in clay and describing what each element does, but doing that together. And it really centered around what they sort of talked about as the tree. And it was about climbing, it was about being able to hide, and it was about running. And it was about doing that collectively and together. And so we worked from the way in which the children described this object through a series of drawing workshops in our studio with other members of our group. And you can see our drawings also to the right there, of how we started to think about this as actually a structure that had some buildability, that could be fabricated, which we did in our studio. We have a series of workshops, other makers, so we were able to CNC all these elements, which is a product called Velcro mats, a bit like an MDF, but it's a very sustainable product made of wood waste and comes in these amazing colours, so we didn't have to treat it or anything. And it all slots together. The only fixings are a few screws around the top. And then it's sort of crowned by this massive inflatable ball that was fabricated by
Ball of Death.
The Ball of Death, but fabricated by an amazing company called Imagine Inflatables, which is such a great name, so fitting for this show. And the ball can be removed, and it too roams the gallery at various speeds.
Yep. And I think that's quite interesting because like the marks on the floor are remnants of workshops that have happened here, so they weren't here for the install. And if you are interested, there was sort of the way that our workshops with schools, because it's been heavily booked by schools, and how we manage the room and the different play styles that have emerged in order to manage a group of 60 children within the space is quite interesting. And part of this mark making became management of the group and how they take that ball and follow the red line, how they line these up and it sort of has to go over it, or how they all stand in a line and pass it to each other. So there's that sort of, there is a free play element, but the chaos that ensued with 60 children from a school, the teachers were like, So our associate artists quickly learned that some of their session needs to be an element of free play, an element of facilitated play, and an element of very structured play. So that's been quite interesting that's emerged that we didn't foresee actually.
Yeah. And then these kind of squidgy elements have, you can kind of hear it there, but they have sound pieces which are recordings that Sian did at the nursery. And also the neon is Sian's kind of illustrations that were sort of adorned the structure with. So there's also this moment of kind of collaborating on the structure as well. So it's a bit of a mix of the different schools. It's not necessarily kind of like one piece.
But I think the children from Robin Hood, one of them mentioned that wouldn't it be great if there was sound?
Yeah.
And that was just a little comment that
they
Holly
had a menu. They had a list of like everything they wanted to achieve in this one structure. So it's climbable. And yeah, the ball comes off.
So behind you we've got the love letter to play, 3 stages of play, which is the children at the nursery and artist Sian Watson. And so because the programme's heavily documented, it was a way of actually almost an editing process, but it became, I can't receive all these images, there's too many. What sums up your workshop? So she sort of, worked out the start of play, the middle, actual play taking place, and then the remnants and what happens afterwards. So she's documented her workshops in these 3 stages quite clearly. And then on the 2 monitors are the films that we spoke about. One's from Jubilee Academy, which is them sort of creating those sculptures in their outdoor space at school. And the other one is the Melbury Primary film that they developed the script for and then went out into their school grounds to film. So that's there as well. And then over here, which is actually got quite a lot of post-it notes on it, is about rules. So we had a big discussion about rules. And because this project was quite new in the sense of working collaboratively and also in the sense of it's actually going to change what we're asking the public, or that invitation, it changes the invitation to the public that are coming in about how to interact with an exhibition. And so from internal and external conversations we had, well, they won't be able to run, they won't be able to do this, they can't do that, they can't do this. And so I was, documenting all that, because what we need to do is make sure our staff are comfortable within this space. So we've done quite a lot of training with our staff on how to manage a space that actually might and could potentially be quite problematic, where people are taking risks, because we want them to take risks, where they're owning the space, it belongs to them, and what and the parameters of what that risk you know, how that's managed. And so one of our schools, Edna G. Olds, was working with their artist Charlotte Tupper, and Charlotte had been working with them on providing loose parts actually for their playground that they'd selected. And when she went back a couple of weeks later, they'd got all these post-it notes all over the windows with rules on: no more than 5 people, no more than 10 minutes, you can't have this, you can't have that. So we're like, right, okay, we need to talk. She was like, we need to talk about this. So what we did is we sort of like, actually, we've got the same issue here as well. You know, let's present these to the children and see what sort of, I think she calls it silly, ridiculous sort of responses that they come up with. So that's that piece there that, get covered every day in post-its that we have to edit down, and then everyone else sort of adds to, about taking out the do nots, taking out the can'ts, and the ridiculousness of some of the responses of the children. So for instance, if they can't run, what can they do? Can they zip wire in? Can they fly in? Can they, you know, what's the worst that's going to happen? You get a trip before your head and it's going to split open, you know. So we were looking at that sort of ridiculousness and consequences of rules, and what's the worst that can happen, really. And that's what that piece is about there as well. What we didn't point out was in the front window, the lovely sort of marks that have been left by our visitors. That have been scratched into the white paint. It's not so much in this one actually, but there's some. So it started off with a little love heart with initials in, like what you would leave in a tree stump, you know, or the bark, you know, in the bark of a tree. Or what you'd scratch into the enamel on the playground. And so there's some really lovely moments in there on the window that have emerged. So
yeah. Also, I don't know if any of you noticed coming along, but the kind of object opposite, the obelisk opposite on the street, mirrors the big red.
Oh yeah.
In such a funny, we've got a really nice photo of its reflection in the window. So there's these really nice moments of coming back, and I mean, you're seeing it every day, but the way in which people are using space in a way that we wouldn't have been able to predict. And you can kind of start to see what the invitation is. You know, it's not destroyed, but there are kind of moments where people have maybe done something that in early meetings about the space, we might have been like, oh, we need to make sure that's painted over or that's touched up, and actually working out what to embrace. And I think Assemble pushing Nottingham a little bit on what was acceptable or not.
And I think we still are as we go through the exhibition, because there's things that have emerged that we wouldn't, like, oh, is that okay? Yes, fine, it's fine. Stop. Yeah. So we still go back, you know, a little bit and just question, because that's in our nature. That's how we work within galleries. So it's challenging us, which is a really good thing.
Nice to see you again. A very warm welcome, and thank you for joining our in conversation today between Jane Hall, of the founding member of Assemble, and Lisa Jacques, our Nottingham Contemporaries learning program manager. My name is Canan Batur, and I'm the curator of live programs here at Nottingham Contemporary. We hope all of you and your families are safe and you've been enjoying the summer thus far. Tonight, as you know, we welcome you here to join us in conversation between Jane and Lisa to talk and deliberate on our exhibition, The Place We Imagine. And it will last for an hour and 30 minutes. But before, I'll let them, maybe shorter, but I just want to kind of relay some brief housekeeping notes. Our live programs open up different interventions and propositions within our curatorial research across the organization. And this event expands on our current research trend, emergency and emergence, as well as our event series, The Adventure Playground, Architecture of Contemporary Play, that consists of exploratory talks and propositions that investigate processes of play and imagination, and their role in built environments and design spaces of playgrounds. It brings forward the architectural and political history of playgrounds and as dedicated spaces for children across contemporary cities, and centers on the idea of world making. Although we will keep an informal atmosphere throughout the evening, you can understand from the fact that we're not even using mics, our talks and performances screenings seek to create challenging environments where open-mindedness and respect for each other's approaches and perspectives can foster growth. So please be mindful and respectful of each other's opinions and views. In the unlikely case of an emergency, a member of staff will guide you to the nearest fire exit. And I would like to use this opportunity to extend our thanks to our funders, the University of Nottingham and Nottingham Trent University, for generously and graciously supporting today's event, as well as my colleagues, Philippa Douglas, Shannon Charlesworth, Catherine Masters, Paul Buttle, Jim Brower, and Amelia for making this event possible. Lastly, as with all events here at Nottingham Contemporary, today's talk is free to attend, but all donations are always greatly appreciated to help support future programs. So without further delay, I'm very pleased to introduce Assemble and Schools of Tomorrow for those who haven't had the chance to be with us during the walkthrough. Assemble is a multidisciplinary collective working across architecture, design, and art. Founded in 2010, Assemble has worked and developed a cooperative working method that enables build social and research-based work at a variety of scales, both making things and making things happen. In 2015, they won the Turnham Prize, the first architects to do so. Schools of Tomorrow is a four-year-long learning and research program funded by the Paul Hamlin Foundation, which places artists in the residence at 8 local schools. Together, artists Gillian Brandt, Laura Eldred, Peter Romney, Sian Taylor, and Charlotte Tupper, alongside teachers, develop approaches to supporting creativity in and beyond the classroom through a process of action-led inquiry. Assemble linked with 3 of our partner schools to develop a play structure. Many thanks again for joining our event and our community. And without further delay, I'll let Jane and Lisa to start their conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna. We're just fascinated by the photos. We're getting quite distracted at the collection of photos. So we've decided not to use mics, so please do let us know if we need to speak up at any point. However, we do have a roaming mic for if there's any questions that you'd like to ask after we've had our conversation, our in-discussion. And if there was any questions that sort of fell over from, or not fell over, from upstairs from the walkthrough as well, please do hold on to those so we can also answer those. We're all really distracted, aren't we? Jane's not seen all of these, so yeah, it's a little bit of a slideshow. But they, there's it gives you an overview really of how we've been working with our schools and also what's been happening in the galleries upstairs and the interventions that have taken place up there. But I think from our perspective, one of the things that we would like to discuss is the collaborative process. And how that's provided many challenges, it's provided many insights and lots of learning, and at the same time it's been very celebratory in what it's achieved as well. And I think from my perspective, I'm really interested in how Assemble as a collective work collaboratively with other organisations and see how difficult we were. So it's really it might be quite an indulgent sort of questioning with Jane, but I think it might be good to just give an overview of how Assemble work as a collective in a collaborative structure.
So Assemble, and it's quite interesting in your introduction because they say Assemble the first architects to win the Turner Prize. I don't think actually any of us were qualified at the time. And there's only like
fake.
3 people who are qualified now, and I'm not even one of them. So we came together as a group of friends, fresh out of university, who wanted to have a close relationship with building and with making, alongside our sort of day jobs in offices. And so we built a cinema inside an old petrol station, and it was made kind of by many hands, making on site. We didn't have a single drawing. It was all done orally, through testing, through failing, through prototyping. And really it was kind of one big disorganized collaboration. And so much of that was about kind of working out a methodology for working with each other, and sort of embracing different people's voices. So the thing I really love about our early projects is how you can really observe different people's kind of hands in a project. Things that there's this one project, there's one photo I really like showing of the interior of the garage with these like crazy plastic ceiling tiles, because we'd made a vacuum former to turn these tiles into something more interesting, and they look terrible. They look really bad. But someone made them, someone put in a lot of effort and really innovated to get that to happen, and so they're there and they're part of the project. And so I think for us as kind of young designers, it was all about how can you open up your work to embrace kind of the input from other people when it might not fit within your kind of box of, or idea of what a project should be about. And so a lot of our projects, because I think we're quite open to that and really enjoyed that, ended up involving a lot of more explicit collaborative ways of working with clients, especially. So the project in Liverpool that got nominated for the Turner Prize was a refurbishment of 10 houses in a really rundown area called Granby, which is not dissimilar to lots of areas in Liverpool, unfortunately, but these buildings had fallen into decline, yet there were still people living among them, and they really wanted to save their homes, but that meant also saving their neighbourhoods. So it was a really big task, and a lot of it was actually about supporting them, and it was years of visits, staying there, working with them, and really kind of rebuilding the houses from what we could find locally, a lot of the materials kind of literally from the ground, and really kind of being embedded over a long period of time. But our first project with Play was a playground in Glasgow in a place called Dalmarnock, which is called Baltic Street Adventure Playgrounds. And actually the way we did the playground, we won some funding to make an artwork in 2014 during the kind of, I think Glasgow's hosting the Commonwealth Games. And it's like, why does Dalmarnock, they can't feed their children. Like, what are they going to do with a public sculpture? So we repurposed the funding to get a bit of land and turn it into an open access space for play. And the only thing we really did was remove all of the stuff, get rid of the stuff that was kind of making it a bit dangerous. And we have some amazing photos of children just kind of running about in mud, like that's all they needed. And a lot of the work there was setting up and installing experienced play workers, but also just buying coats and Wellington boots and knocking on the doors and getting the children and feeding them every day and facilitating play to happen. So we've always been very interested in that kind of sense of enabling things to happen. And I think that sort of underpins our approach to collaboration. And in a sense, sort of, there's a thread of that here as well. And we've done lots of other play-related projects, but we've done a kind of film called The Voice of Children, which was looking at adventure playgrounds from around the world, and also a project called The Brutalist Playground, which is also very similar in that it's kind of thinking about scale and typology of play structures. So on the one hand, we're really interested in challenging the playground as a thing, but also about the built environment as a playful place, as a place for children, which often is kind of designed in quite a hostile way for children or for people with children. So a lot of our projects are kind of in that liminal boundary between playground, artwork, and just building. And I've kind of loosened up a bit. I like lots of galleries and things I've talked about, like, we're making a playground in the gallery, and I used to be really like reticent about that and quite like, no, it's not a playground, it's artwork. But I've loosened up a bit about that.
Okay. Yeah, I think it was quite clear that these were sort of artworks. Sorry, I'm pointing as if like I'm referencing the exhibition. Yeah, because they don't, they're not regulated with regards to if they were play structures. Yeah. So they are artworks that you can play on, and I think that was what you sort of.
Yeah, and there's some really interesting conversations, you know, the curators here who are like, should we talk to ROSPA? And it's like, well, ROSPA just do guidelines for play. Like, there's no legal imperative in the UK to install their guidelines in the way that you'd have to with kind of building control and put in building regulations. So they're just guidelines, and lots of them are like completely outrageous and ridiculous.
So this is right. I was going to say, shall we talk about the? So you can see Jane's approach and how that might sort of jar a little bit coming into an organisation such as Nottingham Contemporary. And I think for us, the project was a massive and a really generous invitation for us, particularly within learning, to collaborate with you and with our programme and our schools, and an amazing opportunity. So if we just go step back a little bit about the organisation, we'd started to collaborate internally within our teams. When I first arrived, actually about 4 years ago, with an exhibition called Still I Rise. And I think that was sort of the beginnings of collaboration within our organisation. And I think it's taken until now in order for it to actually be a truly collaborative process. And we're still not there yet. We've still got a lot to go towards. So I think this moment in time of the sort of the Schools of Tomorrow programme being where it was and what it was about, and with your interests, sort of seemed to sort of happen at the same time, and that cross sort of fertilisation of those ideas and the way that they suited together then became more of a collaboration than we could ever imagine. So we have obviously the internal teams here at Nottingham Contemporary, and it was a new process in the sense of how much collaboration there was now. And I think if you look at the exhibition notes, I'm sort of termed as a curator, whereas I sit within learning. So that itself is quite interesting, the same as Amanda as well. And then we also had, what was going on was our work with the schools. So we've got 8 schools, as we mentioned previously, and then we've also got 5 associate artists. And so how do we make sure that the conversation is collaborative with them? How do we make sure that that conversation goes beyond the teachers and to the pupils as well? So you can imagine how many pupils there are in those sort of 8 schools as well. So I think it was getting bigger and bigger, and then obviously the collaboration with Assemble and the actual programme as well.
But I think that's why creating a sense of ownership is really, I think, important to how we think about collaboration, because I don't think you can have something that feels collaborative unless people feel like they have some sort of stake in the project or agency over shaping it. And I think there was, for a long time, it was like having all these Zoom meetings and coming up to Nottingham and meeting you and Amanda and other people who run. You've got the kind of older programme that's what's the age range? 18 to 25 or something?
15 to 25.
15 to 25. So at the beginning there were loads of conversations with loads of different characters at Nottingham.
I think, if we start sort of at the beginning, I think the conversation started with yourself and Sam Thorne, our director, about what might happen. Do you want to just...
Well, actually, more simply than that, Sam came to our studio and said, do you know anything about this drawing by Bo Bardi? I think
just happened to come across it.
He had happened to come across it, and I'd done my doctoral research about Lena's work, and particularly actually about the museum in the drawing. I was like, well, actually, I do know quite a lot about this. And I think he then mentioned that he really wanted to do something with the learning programme and the education programme, and to try and maybe mirror in a way or take inspiration from the way Bo Bardi talked about the museum as a kind of place of learning, a place that was child-led. And it was just a big question mark about, like, well, what could that mean in Nottingham? And in a way it was sort of like he just sort of put us together in a room. And I don't think I talked much to Sam about the project since, mostly just to you guys. And it's kind of been this amazing transition, I think, from kind of feeling a little bit like we didn't want to step on your toes.
Well, I was just going to come to that, actually.
And I think at the beginning there was this kind of sense of inequity as well, that thing where you don't know each other.
Yeah, so I think the first sort of meeting that we had with our associate artists, and we were sort of, why would our associate artists want to do workshops from Assemble?
And we weren't part of that. You were trying to do those conversations separately.
We were. So I think firstly the project was introduced and the potential was there, with the cross between the collaboration with Assemble and Schools of Tomorrow. And then I think it was very much about remaining true to the programme of Schools of Tomorrow and what that's about, so that we don't change the direction for the schools, we don't change the direction that the artists were going towards. And so it was about, like you said, that inequity and stepping on toes. So it was about almost quite possessive, I think, about retaining what that programme was and what it was about. And we didn't want to lose our voice, you know. So I think from the outset that was what you were coming into, really. That's the room that you were coming into. And I think the first stage in the process was actually discussing that with our associate artists, discussing it with our schools about the potential of what might happen. There might be a collaboration, because I think to impose that, you know, was a bit, whoa, actually, can we see whether this aligns? Can we see whether this fits? So I think it was about how it could possibly work and the potential it had before we actually sort of said, yes, it will, etc., etc. Because, yeah, it's your Turner Prize winners, you know, it's like, whoa. And we need to share the skills and the knowledge and the learning that was happening in the schools, and to make sure that that had a voice from the beginning. So yes, I think that initial sort of meeting was about our artists showcasing their practice and also the history that they had with regards to the connections of play, outdoor learning, and their journeys within each of their individual schools. And I think it was from that moment, which was very early on, about 3 years ago.
Yeah. Well, actually, because everyone came to our studio, you brought
we did,
lots of people. And it was kind of, I could sense it was like people didn't quite know why they were there, what what we were talking about. And one of the big things that everyone seemed really worried about was how, and I don't know if you've noticed, but we haven't talked about it since, everyone's so worried that if you let children run around, it would be too noisy. They're really worried. They're
really
like,
noisy.
how are you going to control the
really
noise?
Noisy, yeah.
And I was like, well, I don't even know what we're doing yet. So I don't know. Like, and is that a problem? And so it was really interesting as a starting point to just actually hear what different people are worried about. You know, what are the anxieties and the concerns? And I suppose in the very early stages, like that sort of like lack of trust a bit, that like it's all going to be okay and like there's a process here. And I thought that was really interesting, because it felt at that point that we needed to just actually like sit back a bit and just observe. So then we came here. I think actually it took about a year because of everything, but in this space we had all the artists over the course of the afternoon present their different work, and there's some really interesting and kind of diverse approaches, and it was really, I think, giving that moment for everyone to have their voice and to say what's important to them and what their inquiry is about and the challenges they have, but also the things that they're really excited about. And we brought Penny Wilson, who's an amazing play worker. She's written this text that's online called the Play Worker Primer, and she's just a kind of really calm, guiding voice about how risk can be managed, how it can be embraced, about the role of adults in play as much as about what it is that kind of children are doing, and also the sort of opportunities. So at different moments we tried also to bring in people who might be able to shape a conversation rather than try and be like extractive about it, like you know, what did they say, okay, we must include that, like.
And I think at the time you'd started Assemble Play, that Penny.
So Assemble have a sort of sister organisation called Assemble Play, which is basically just Penny, and it enables her to organise play workers in actually kind of institutions a bit like this, so Pitshanger Manor, Royal Academy, lots of outdoor developments like around King's Cross for Argent, the developer, kind of activating underused public spaces, mostly on weekends and in holidays. And it literally is like a toolkit of stuff, and some experienced play workers who just sort of make things kind of happen. And so Assemble Play is sort of trying to challenge the way in which parts of the built environment are kind of understood to be used, and see if they could be used in a different way, and invite children into that. way of using space. So that sits within Assemble. It's kind of managed by us at Assemble, but it's really about supporting Penny to kind of do that type of work, which is play work, adventure playgrounds. It's all completely unfunded by the government. It's just a kind of free-for-all. So it's also about how to make it something that can actually be, a really important offer to support play workers to do what they kind of want to do in quite precarious sort of contexts. But yeah, Penny is a kind of really well-known, established sort of voice in the sort of play world.
Yeah, and I think it was really good to hear that external voice. She is very relaxed, very calm, and
She's been up to talk to the GAs.
Yeah, so another strand of sort of the collaboration, and I touched upon it earlier within the galleries, was about ensuring that our staff were confident in delivering a show such as this. So we did a few research trips. So the Baltic in Newcastle has been amazing. So they're on their 4th year of play exhibition. And we went up with our play and learn facilitators, learning, and our gallery assistants as well. And our curatorial team, I think we're in touch with them, in dialogue with them as well, to understand the complexities of this type of show and how it challenges the usual traditional exhibitions on gallery, and how that's challenging for our staff to manage, which we touched upon upstairs. And so it was about understanding their sort of anxieties as well. So this is where we sort of talk more sort of internally about how we've sort of collaborated internally with the teams. So we've put in quite a lot of a training programme and worked really closely with our gallery assistants, our front of house team, and listened to their concerns. That's where I got the big list that I gave to the school. Yeah. And listened when they seen some of the designs, the gasps and horror of the potential of how these were going to be used, the audiences that were going to come, and how we had our traditional audience and how this was going to change that. We drew on quite a lot of experience from our families programme on how we engage with our families within this space, actually, how to negotiate conflict, how to negotiate risk, but in a way that isn't obstructive to play or obstructive to certain behaviours. And so Baltic were really supportive in sharing their knowledge of their 4th play exhibition. I think their first one, they had a broken arm. So yeah, I think they've learnt a lot along the way. And taking that on board, but then actually it's completely different for us because the exhibits are different, the space is different, the floor is different. It's a no shoes exhibition, and how we sort of negotiated all that with our front of house and alleviated their concerns to build that confidence in them, that they were confident to be on gallery, confident to interact, confident to engage. So we had workshops that were to do with body language, that were to do with language, how we approach people, about rules. There are no rules, but there are some rules, with regards to risk, etc., etc. So, and this was a challenge for our curators as well, I believe, and I'm talking on behalf of one, or actually in this instance as one, with this exhibition, about the possibilities. So
yeah, and it felt like that was quite difficult for us because, in a way, at that moment, Nottingham has to decide what level of risk you're happy with, and we've kind of mitigated against obvious ones with the way we've designed things, but what we've always found with a lot of projects is like the unexpected happens. So you can plan as much as you like, but it's always going to be something over there that's someone does. And I think this thing about experience is really important, but also confidence, because a lot of the playgrounds that we've worked with, and the one in Scotland, is, children have they have knives, they have saws, they have fire. And the film we made, there's a very experienced play worker talking about, you know, okay, so people cut themselves, but they only cut themselves once because it's about learning.
That's a proper
the
parent
tools,
sort of
you know.
comment.
And in a way, it felt like a real challenge because gallery assistants are being, you know, they're gallery assistants. They haven't signed up to be play workers, which is actually a really skilled job that people, you know, do professionally. So what was it too much of an ask? Is there a balance? How can the process of the show become something that people feel supported to take on a bit of that role? And the one rule we have at Baltic Street is you can do whatever you want as long as you don't stop someone else from doing what they want, which has like a really kind of nice clarity to it. But in practice, yeah, you find a lot of other stuff happening. And when we've done the Brutalist Playground, I remember in Sheffield, it's these huge sculptures covered in foam, really brightly coloured. They just like completely transform the space, the whole landscape of fun stuff. And I remember they tried to bring a group of reception kids, so they're like 4 or 5 years old, and they were coming up the hill, and the people in the gallery were like, right, so when they come, we're going to take them here, and then we're going to sit them all down, and we're going to explain to them the show, we're going to take their shoes off, and they're going to neatly arrange them, and then we'll take them onto the thing. And I could just see these 4-year-olds coming towards us, and I was like, good luck with that. And you know, they're right in, they're just throwing themselves at it, they're throwing their shoes back at the area they were supposed to take them off in because they've decided later to do that. You know, it's interesting to understand, I think, adult behaviour. And I quite enjoyed your email, I think sent a week later, which had a list of things that had happened in the gallery since it opened. And a lot was sort of normal, nice things that we kind of expected. But then you had lots of stuff, I don't know if it was you or someone else said that the animals had been made into like bowling pins and people, like adults, were using the ball to like knock them over. And it was like, oh, it's quite innovative. Like,
that is good.
Well done adults for participating too. So I think it's, I don't know, it'd be interesting to know if the GAs feel
so
okay about it all.
Just drawing back to the sort of collaboration process, we'd had these conversations, we were all quite tentative. We were trying to work out whether this was the right thing for our programme. Yes, it was. Was this the right thing for our associate artists, for our schools? Yes, it was. And for the organisation, to sort of provide something quite different for our audiences and also different for the organisation. And I think that the dialogue and the conversation you touched upon when we were just chatting between about how important it is to try and work people's personalities out, try and work out, you know, and that in itself is quite complex given the amount of people that were involved in that collaborative process. And we started off with Kira, who was our interim chief curator then, who was covering maternity leave from Nicole. And so the conversations did start with that, and so there's this passing of information as well. And you were I didn't want to elaborate a little bit more about how important the honest communication and dialogue is, you know, in order to sort of progress forward, and where that becomes a challenge and where the frustrations lie, because, you know, some of it is a frustrating process.
Yeah. Well, I think there are a few moments where it was like, I think there was a bit of a kind of lull where I think we were all expecting something to happen, but no one knew what it was. And I think the associate artists, or maybe you guys, were expecting us to come in and do a thing, and the thing would make a thing, and then that would be the thing. And that would look like workshops or something. And we were like, well, no, we're here to embrace whatever it is that you do. What do you do? You know? And I think what really kind of enabled us to move forward was actually just starting a direct conversation with, you know, when you distilled it into the 3 associate artists who we would be working with, and we had kind of 3 direct points of contact who were in the schools. You know, they got this point where it felt like we were talking so much about doing stuff with children, and I hadn't met a single child yet in Nottingham. And I remember the day when we went to see Sian at Nottingham Nursery, and Laura at Robin Hood, and actually just observed. Yeah. We just participated in what they were doing, and you're like straight in there with Sean, who is like singing and painting, and it's got glow sticks, and these are kind of like 18 months younger even children.
So at the nursery, yes, they're all sort of 0 to 4.
Yeah.
Really. Yeah.
And sort of what I really took from that was how much she expected from them.
Do it.
Yeah, she just was like kind of encouraging them to do all sorts of stuff I didn't think was possible. But I think that really then for us enabled us to think more confidently about the structures we were making, rethink how appropriate they were or not. Would they suddenly realizing that kids that young could get meaningful participation out of what we were designing? And every conversation we had with Sean and then with Laura at Robin Hood, where it was year 5 and 6, so kind of 10, 11-year-olds, we just got something new out of just being there. And at Robin Hood also this sense of permissiveness. So we had a teaching associate come round with us with the different groups, and depending on which teaching associate you had, it was a completely different vibe. So some of the kids were like climbing up trees. They're in this like forest schools environment. They're climbing up the trees, and the teacher's just like, they're not normally allowed to do that, like this is special. But she really embraced this sense that the kids were taking part in something, whereas the other TAs were like, kept telling them off, and it was all very kind of sort of more bounded. But just being able to be part of the school and seeing the different things that those children were exposed to during their day, their environment, the impact Laura had when she came in. She did a thing in the afternoon where she just got bowls of water and like lots of bits and just put it on the floor. And then these kind of 10, 11-year-olds come down and she's like, there it is. And I thought we were doing like a water workshop. I thought she had like a strategy for this, but she just sat down. She was
that
like,
was her
is.
strategy.
And that was her strategy. And they just did what they wanted to do, and they had a great time. And we took a lot from that. So I think we were talking earlier about collaboration. There's usually an expectation for it to look like something, for it to look like a workshop with a thing that we can document and we can point to. And actually, the collaboration over the last 2 years has become, and the things that you do see in the gallery are just a product of dialogue between us all, talking to Laura in the staff room over a cup of tea, between between the actual activities. I think that's where we got so much inspiration for kind of what to do, and why, for when it came to the fun house, I think as a designer you're always worried with these collaborative projects about imposing yourself too much.
Mm-hmm. I think that was our worry as well. Yeah. It was about ensuring that the artist, the school, that partnership had a voice. The children very much have a voice, about their sort of autonomy and the authorship.
That was the other thing that I found amazing as we, Shine, they're like, Jane, explain what you do to these 10-year-olds. So I've got our website up and I'm like, we're architects, we do this thing. And how responsive they all were. You show them terraced houses and you're like, does anyone live in a house like this? And they're like, I do. Or I showed them a picture of, I think, our winter garden project. And I was like, do any of you know what this is? And they all just had a go. They all got it completely wrong, but they were so confident in just saying what they were thinking. And then I was describing to them that we would be making large sculptures in a gallery that lots of them hadn't been to in Nottingham, and that they would design them with us and come and see them. And they just got it. They were just their little faces, they were like so excited. And so coming out of those assemblies, I was like, oh God, we have to, better make this good. Because it seemed suddenly much more obvious about how we would like take them on this journey, with us coming in now and again, but with Laura, Sian, Jill, Charlotte, Peter, like installed as a constant. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how I think our collaboration sort of took form.
I just want to come back to, so you said it really sort of changed when we had the 3 schools. So the way that we selected the 3 schools for the collaboration, so obviously we've got 8. One was actually budgetary and time, and then it was working out which schools best aligned with actually this journey, and also providing different age ranges, because we knew their developmental stages were going to be completely different. So you got quite a lot out of the nursery.
Yeah.
You know, you've already said there was revelations about, you know, what they can do so young. So that's why we sort of selected them. One, because the age range, and also what the inquiries they were already looking at. So it had this, and I keep mentioning it, had this natural flow to it. So the other school was the Jubilee Lead Academy School, and we've worked with them previously, and we'd been working with them, and they'd done an amazing job. They'd gone into special measures. They'd done an amazing job to get out of special measures, and it got re-Ofsted, and it was amazing. But in order to get out of that special measures to a good sort of grading, they had a very regimented style, and that sort of has stayed with them. Elements of that has stayed with them. So it also provided a school that was very regimented in their approach, and the impact that might potentially have, as well as a school like Robin Hood, where they fully embrace the arts. They're partnered with the RSC. They've got like a very arts-rich curriculum. So there was that as well as the nursery, which also provided that sort of early years element. So the three schools were quite particular in our selection about.
Well, and that's what I think is also. We talk a lot about the associate artists, but it was Riley, Amanda, and
these are the
Terry,
teaching staff
who were the teachers who were just so welcoming to us. It was amazing. Very hard not to call Riley in front of his kids, who were all like, I don't even know what his surname is. Mr. Walker, but they were yet another layer to take on this kind of whole thing.
Okay, so we've got to these three schools, and then it was one school in particular, which was Robin Hood, that you went in, and you touched on that briefly, how the third sculpture was developed. So do you just want to talk a little bit about the sort of genesis of that third sculpture, which we sort of explained upstairs as the fun house?
Yeah, so with from the beginning, from the outset, we were sort of like, well, we're going to do two of the kind of four things that you can see in Lena's drawing, and we'll make a third one that will be the product of this collaboration, without really knowing like how that was going to kind of manifest itself. And I think it was towards the end of last year it became obvious that Robin Hood was the school which would best welcome us in a way to visit more frequently and do a more hands-on workshop with their students, kind of guided by Laura and Kerry, the teacher there. And coming back to this idea of your role as a designer and kind of when you step in, a lot of our projects, people come to us because they're interested in the way we work with people, and they have this sense, and there's always a sense when you see architects talking about participation, that somehow like people can design buildings themselves, and the architects should just step aside, they are not needed. Whereas actually and I think it's so evident here, this moment where you have to interpret something, you have to have knowledge of construction and of building in order to fit with these constraints such as budget, time, safety measures, and how we could take something that the children had made, the pupils had made themselves, and be in a way true to that and representative of that, so they understand it as something they've made, but actually just deliver a thing that will kind of stand up for the 4 months of the show. So the fun house, to get 3D really quick, we used clay, because it's just so, it's like the best amateur craft because you need no skills to do cool stuff with clay. And we have a kiln in our studio in London, so we were able to fire the sculpture and glaze it, and
many pieces of
many
sculpture.
pieces.
As I collected it from the school, the receptionist shook the box.
Oh
and
gosh!
Went, here you go.
This box of brittle greenware. But and then we've done a lot of clay stuff with professional ceramicists in our studio. We have professional ceramicists also in our studio, and we have a clay club at the studio, but making as a form of conversation was something I hadn't really done before, and it was really interesting with the children. We talked as we made, and the thing became representative of the conversation, but it wasn't like, oh, we're all going to make a climbing wall or we're going to make a thing. It was the sort of weird organic lump, and I think that's why I was a bit unsure about putting it in the gallery space, because I think to anyone who looks at it, it's probably quite hard to understand what it is. Whereas I think when me and Holly, my colleague who's worked on this project, look at it, I'm like, I remember which kid did which bit. You know, Victoria, it's Victoria's tree. If anybody wants to know, Victoria's tree. So she was responsible for that bit, and then different students did other elements. And actually there's a bit of all of them in it. And so we really tried in our interpretation to kind of represent that, but almost also distill it to these basic parts, just to have that clarity of something that we could build. And so it became this structure that sort of all slots together, making best use of a sheet of material that could be flat packed from our studio and taken up in a van to Nottingham, installed on site in a limited amount of time, with 2 people being able to lift each thing, or rather 2 people from my studio, me bossing them around. And then getting kind of moments fabricated. The blue bag structure stuff is made by a textile designer called Georgia Bosson, who we work with a lot because she's up for weird challenges. And then Sian brought in, the associate artist of the nursery, brought in these sound pieces, capturing moments, recordings, and then those are sort of integrated into the soft bits and the kind of discoverable. So that's also one of the things she talks a lot about, is curiosity, and that things shouldn't be obvious, that you might accidentally come across something and then kind of work it out for yourself, and it might lead you somewhere else. And then this notion of the kind of big crowning ball, the top of the tree, as something that would be enable the thing to kind of come apart a bit in the way that the clay sculpture does. So at that moment through the workshop, it was really like about interpreting it. And then when they came and just sort of tried to explain to them how you'd done it all, and they're just running after the ball and deflated it, and
we'll get on to actually everything being activated. So I think from what you're saying, really, you're talking about the dialogue, the conversation, the learning the collaborative process, the learning that it's enabled for you, in order to influence sort of like the exhibition, the exhibits, and the way that objects are used. And you were talking about Sian and the nursery, about it's all about discovery, it's all about coming across something, and about the child's voice as well comes quite strongly in the sense where you're sort of talking about Robin Hood, and about it was through discussion and making at the same time as well. So that's quite an interesting sort of draw on the processes that have happened. And I know we can't cover everything, because there's so much to say, isn't there? We could go on, but I think if we move on to actually when the exhibition sort of opened, how we all stood there and went, oh my God, when all the kids came in. So I think for us, to make sure that we so you were up for a number of weeks installing it was installed over a couple of weeks. That process, and at the same time, we were organising with schools when they come in for their private view. It was definitely their private view. It was their art that's on show here. The perimeter work as well, from content from each school, as well as the input into, and I would say, quite, the animal menagerie. It was that cumbersome element that you took from the nursery, the collaborative way of working that you found with the children. And for them to be able to sort of see that realised, and for them to come in and own the space. And I think we had a test group in to test out the fun house. And we all stood there just waiting to see what might happen. And that group weren't involved in the design of it or hadn't actually seen it before. And so it was, reading their reactions and our observations, and there was no sort of prompts or anything like that. And then to the following day where we actually had the private view in the afternoon. You were just saying as you came in, last time you came, this was full of kids.
Yeah.
I think we were all singing and dancing as a little bit of a warm-up for their private view, and how we celebrated their achievements as well, and how much it was about them on the gallery. And then I think we had 60 pupils at a time on gallery, which is the capacity, to see what happened, how they were going to respond, and how they seen themselves within the exhibition. And so I think, I mean, do you want to talk a little bit about actually what did happen?
Oh, it's carnage.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it was, and that's something that I think maybe I kind of could have anticipated but hadn't really thought much about, is the difference between a gallery that's full of people who know each other and actually a gallery which on any given day is full of smaller groups of strangers, and the impact that might have. So I think because the children have been quite hyped up about coming and all knew each other, they were just like, they treated it like it was like their house or something. Like they really took it apart, and I think they discovered that the ball had the stopper.
Yeah.
So they took it out, and of course the whole thing deflated, and I was like, oh no, it's got a rip. But it was absolutely fine, and luckily I think it is pretty much undestroyable.
And so it was, it was having conversations with them and observations about how they started to use the space that we could then take back. And we were like, we never expected the soft play to be used as trampolines. You know, we were like, what are they doing? You know, and observing that. And I think that's been quite important throughout the whole exhibition, about this observation of how our visitors, who then become participants, experience the show and the environment.
Yeah, well, it was actually one of the Robin Hood kids who I was like, should we take the ball off the top? Because no one had really worked out that they could do that. And he was like, can we? And I was just so shocked that it was like, people are going crazy around us and you're asking me if we're allowed to take the ball off, which was probably the mistake, because once it came off it. But there's still, you know, they're always navigating what's allowed. So it looks like chaos, but actually they're all thinking like, can I do this? What's happening? What will happen if I do this? Like, there's actually, I think...
and how can I do that? Who can I work with? How can we make this happen as a group?
And that's, you know, it takes a couple of people to do stuff in the gallery. So like moving the animals, or getting the ball off, or moving that, or you know, there's not much stuff there that you can do entirely alone. And so there's there's one photo that's just got like 5 or 6 children pushing the ball, with just loads of adults sitting chatting on a bench, just not having anything to do with it. And I think that's just quite a nice image of the way in which a space sort of is articulated for different people. And
so we were quite keen to make this a dynamic show, in the sense that there was a lot of activity programmes. So we've had so many school visits and workshopping happening in that space. And what was left behind, so we mentioned the tape on the floor, and then how another group then uses that to navigate their way around the space, or to navigate the exhibits. And that's been quite a challenge for us as an organisation, to have remnants left on the gallery, and it's okay for people to interact with. How our school groups interact and collaborate with our day-to-day visitors. So how that's negotiated, whose space is it when a school group is in there, as opposed to, you know, as well as having sort of public visitors. And it's about that dialogue that our artist has with, you know, the parent and with the school kids, to the point where there was one point where actually the school kids were taking a little toddler down on their knees down the slide. So it became, it was everyone's space, you know, it belonged to everyone. And they were sort of, you know, encouraging those visitors to draw and do what they do. And it's about how they felt so comfortable within that space.
It's quite weird when you have to leave a project, like we have left it, whereas you have to deal with it every single
but I think,
day.
So this is an element that I think is really quite interesting in the sense of that's the traditional model of an exhibition. It's up and therefore it's just about maintenance. This has been a high maintenance, as Niall will, high maintenance show. But at the same time, we're also wanting it to be quite active and we want it to change, want the environment to change. And so whilst Holly and Jane haven't been here, we've been in constant dialogue around actually this happened today. We've had to look at all these different play styles to manage the space, which I touched upon upstairs. You know, there were these moments like the human skittles with the adults and the skittles with the soft play. And so having that feedback and you sort of sending us images of your friends in the space and how they've used it. So, and I think that's been very generous of you to share and for us to continually have this very much dialogue and this back and forth of how it's all going, because we're all really curious to how it's being used in order that we can take some of that learning and input it into our future programming, you know, to understand what our audiences want from a space such as this or from a show such as this, so that we can identify that and take it forward. So I think for us, that's been quite key. I mean, I know that you also maintain that dialogue with some of the artists as well. So there are separate conversations going on. You get a playlist, I think, from Sean every week, or a monthly playlist, or a Friday song, or something like that. And so it's about those relationships and how they've developed across the time.
And definitely like lots of stuff that we've done through this process, I can already see we're applying to the way in which we work with other institutions that are also seeking, in a different way, very participatory ways of working. And this has been very formative in having, so I think we preach it a lot. We talk about process and just going with it and trial and error and failure. These are things that we like really value as a design practice, but this project, I think, has really kind of given me confidence to like legitimize all of those things. That there can be uncertainty sometimes, and that's okay. And you know, I really enjoyed the shift when I really felt like you were shepherding the artists. It's like, oh, Lisa's in it now. Like it's her project too, and that's when I really felt like it was all of ours. And in a way, I kind of completely relaxed about delivering the thing, because I was very confident that. You know, as an organisation, we were now at a point where it felt very equal as a project, and it's really nice that I still get text messages from Sean, and you know, I think it's got these. You see the remnants and traces physically in the gallery of use, but there are also these less tangible ones that you know will kind of end up somewhere in the future.
Yeah, so that's really interesting how the process has influenced sort of future ways of working, and I think that's a nice way to sort of round up by saying about us as Nottingham Contemporary, about our exhibition programming, and about how we sort of aim to go forward with the collaborative process within our teams, and how we are observing behaviours on gallery and how that might influence future programming to provide those opportunities that our visitors, you know, are sort of really responding to. So I think in that way that's been really positive for us, and I think the learning that has taken place throughout the whole process, not only from the Schools of Tomorrow programme about how we work with schools, how we bring in additional artists, how we, you know, and it is all about that communication and that dialogue and understanding the ebbs and flows that happen as well throughout the whole process. So, I think there's been many challenges, many learning, much learning as well, but how we will take those forward into future practices of Assemble, Nottingham Contemporary, and how our artists will take those forward as well within their own practice.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
Yeah. So I think
Great.
I think we are done, because we can talk forever and we need to be stopped. Obviously, if there's any questions, please just, we may have covered everything, possibly. Please feel free to ask, but no pressure. It's quiet. We must have a few from internal staff, maybe, just to,
No. Yeah. So nice to see all the photos.
It is, yeah.
Because also,
that's a fraction. And quite a lot of them have been taken on a mobile phone as well, so the quality might not be, but there have been key moments for artists where they needed to capture, and so and I think that sort of DIY aspect is really endearing to the project as well.
Well, we got someone from our studio, Hannah, who's a great photographer, and we've just become really every project we do, I'm like, we have to get it properly photographed, because you can never trust anyone else to photograph your own project for you. You have to make sure you've got your own person there. And she's made she's got lovely photos, really lovely, but actually I'm seeing all these nice, less formal ones taken with phones, which just capture it so much more in a way. Yeah. There's a really nice quality to them. So you have to send me.
So if no one else has got questions, we've got questions for each other. We'll just carry on.
So send me the photograph.
Yeah.
And things I'm like, that was one of my favourite moments actually. This is Esme, who was complete terror, who was bossing the photographer around, and then he left in the afternoon. She's like, "Where's that man gone? Where's the man gone?" And she was just instructing him.
And I think she was the
tiniest one.
And I think she's
Sean said it's because she had older siblings.
Yeah, she is a character.
She knows what she wants.
She came to the private view as well. Yeah. So
yeah. But enjoy upstairs and bring people to it.
Yeah, so it's on until September the 4th. As Janan mentioned, there was the additional talks, the additional programme that's happening as well, so you may be interested in that. That's all online, and that's happening throughout July. And then we also have our summer family programme of workshops, which are free workshops for our families that take place in this space, with the environment being designed by Southwold Primary School, who were very much into immersive environments, but didn't quite fit with upstairs, so the invitation naturally fit with our families programme, so they'll be designing giving us the ideas for the AV, IT and sound in the space.
Oh, wow.
So please do come back and play in the exhibition, and if we've got our family activities on, please do bring any littlies that belong to you to enjoy it. So.